I'm Julian Darley. I'm a sometime software engineer. I was once a Hollywood script doctor. I have a very strange portfolio. I won't even call it career, portfolio life. But I have been a software engineer, and I am one again now, entirely thanks to artificial intelligence and LLMs. I'm also, I call myself an AI evangelist. I think it's absolutely fascinating and amazing. I think there's also some interesting problems, but we're going to talk mainly about the fascinating and amazing part tonight. I'm also a critical energy analyst, and I will use an energy example in what I hope will be a live coding demo. It worked about half an hour ago, but you know how tech is. It may not still be working. So if can you hear me all right, everybody? Because I got a little microphone here, but I won't use that then. I'll take one sip of water and hope that the clicker is working. So yeah, secret life of coding agents. Is it going to work? His clicker's worked. Right. Does anybody know what a coding agent is? Cursor, yeah, GitHub Copilot. Okay, so some people. What I'm about to show you is the cutting edge of the known coding agents, and I'm going to say a little bit about where it's going, because it's going very fast. It seems blindingly obvious, but I just wanted to say a word about why coding agents are important, because what they do is help make software, and software underlies practically every part of modern life. If you start thinking about everything in this room, this computer, how you got here, even much of your food, all depends now on software because of all the machinery that's involved in the production of absolutely everything. Healthcare is another one, finance, transportation, entertainment, just about everything. If something goes wrong with the software, as we've seen, you can, basically the world goes dark, or at least a significant chunk of it. So it's reckoned to be about a $600 billion industry. It was a bit hard to find a reliable number for this, but you could argue that maybe it's $60 trillion because virtually the whole world economy depends on it. There are maybe 30 million developers worldwide. Satya Nadella says that there are 150 million on GitHub. There's a lot. There are a very large number of software developers. So it's huge. Software is huge from every perspective that you could think of. So something that's going to make a difference to software, I think, even on its own, apart from what it could do in the future, is highly significant. So what is a coding agent? It's a suite of tools for writing, debugging, and managing code. It's gone through some pretty quick stages. There was autocomplete, which I frankly never found very useful at all. Maybe other people's experience is better, but I thought it was largely useless, quite frankly, and mostly irritating, and it mostly got it wrong. But when coding agents and assistants, when coding agents became more assistant-like, which is fairly recently, but certainly with the advent of GPT-4, it was okay with 3.5, but GPT-4, really things started to get serious. The catch was, as anybody who's tried it, is that it was a lot of cutting and pasting. It would generate something, you'd paste it in, you'd run it, and I'm thinking of Python and PHP and JavaScript and so forth. You'd run it, usually in the browser in this case, and then you'd have to debug it as well. You'd feed the error back into it, and then it would try and debug it, and it was at first it was amazing, but as soon as the project gets larger, it starts to become very tedious. At least that was my experience. And then I was starting to reach, about last November, I was starting to reach a point where I was becoming very fed up with this. And a friend of mine who'd been using Cursor a lot for about a year, I guess somehow I was poked into using it. I don't know why I didn't use it before. Anyway, it was a big leap forward. It was much, much better. And then about the end of November last year, Cursor stopped working. I have no idea why. It's technology, it's software. It just stopped working. And some days before, either somebody had told me or I had discovered Windsurf. And so I was forced to switch to something else. And it was so much better, in my opinion, than Cursor. So it was able to code up fairly major projects very quickly. And I thought, this is absolutely amazing. And the next stage will be more autonomous agents still. So with Windsurf, which I'm about to show you, and now with Cursor, because Cursor got a kick in the pants from Windsurf, and it's very quickly, within days, if not weeks, started copying what Windsurf was able to do. And I'm going to show you some of these things. And so we're now moving towards more autonomous agents where instead of having to keep okaying things and approving things, just about where we are with Windsurf and Cursor and these other agents, they start to become more and more autonomous, where things get really interesting and also dangerous. So the potential benefits of coding agents are productivity, error reduction, and democratization. I don't think there's any doubt about the democratization. There are some, we'll call them skeptics, including some major YouTube bloggers who are very skeptical about this, but my experience is that they do radically increase productivity, especially on the smaller end of projects. And they do help reduce errors. They do introduce errors, it's true, but once you can start to take your standard out and feed it back in automatically, it does it. Error correction starts to happen much more quickly. And there was a glorious moment about 2 weeks ago with Windsurf where it decided to take the bars off, and it started approving everything. And in the space of about 90 seconds, I got what done would have normally taken 2 hours. And then it decided to stop doing that. But it was absolutely amazing. It was this glimpse into the sort of the wonderful mountains, snow-capped mountain range with glorious sunshine of an autonomous agent actually just going for it and correcting its own errors. And this is where we're going. So why it stopped doing it, I have no idea. But anyway, I know what's going to happen. So the coding agent landscape, I've tried to break these down into proprietary agents like Windsurf, Cursor, Cognition's Devin. There was a big splash about Devin about 9 months ago. It's still going, it's quite expensive. Well, arguably it's not expensive, but anyway. And there's a whole list of them. I won't read all this lot there. And some of these are also open source agents like Klein, Ada, again, I won't. OpenHands was Open Devin. As soon as Devin came out, there was an open version that got formed that's now become OpenHands. In my experience, I haven't checked every single one, otherwise I would still be not ready in a month's time to do this talk, that the open source ones still depend very strongly on Sonnet, particularly Sonnet. So I'm very interested in trying to get away from that and try and actually use open source or open LLMs. I've had some success, but not really good enough to show you tonight. But that's coming, I'm pretty sure of that. So there's lots and lots and lots of them out there. These are, in my experience, again, as far as I can tell, they're all about the same with the exception of, well, I'll best well point to Maestro, which is the one that I'll talk to you a little bit about towards the end. So what it can do is analyze in your initial language prompt to determine the action. Sounds banal, but it does it in a much more sophisticated way. If you just give it to GPT or indeed Gemini 2 or Sonnet on its own, you can ask it to do something and it will start coding up something for you, but it quickly gets limited. Whereas what, and as I'll show you with Windsurf, what it's able to do, it really starts thinking about it much more carefully and starts to build the project. And so it can write a whole new library, a whole new code, absolutely from scratch. That's what I'm going to show you tonight. And it can run that code in a web server, which it will spin up in seconds, which I hope also to be able to show you tonight. It can fix bugs, sometimes very quickly and effectively, especially if they're buried bugs or things which are very tricky. As I said to you, it can read the standard out and it can identify errors and it can bootstrap around. It can run commands, sometimes on its own, sometimes it requires approval. You can give it, in the case of Windsurf, you can give it exceptions, and sometimes it takes those exceptions, and sometimes it changes its mind. I don't know why. It can insert commands into the command line interface, into the terminal, which is very helpful, although it's a bit unreliable about when it decides to do that. Sometimes it tries to poke the command into your into your code, and I think, I don't want it in my code, I want to run it in the terminal. Why are you doing that? I don't know the answer to that either. One of the important things that Klein, which I mentioned in the previous one, which is an open source coding agent, but also it's pretty clear that Windsurf does, and I think some of the other ones do too, is they do continuous incremental analysis, which I'm going to come on to in a little bit. This is pretty important because if you're not continually reanalyzing the code that you've written, you are going to be addressing last week's problems, which is not very much use. These coding agents can read and understand many languages. I've used it for Rust, PHP, JavaScript, Python, and a few others, but those are the main ones, and those are pretty important languages. I haven't tried it for C or C++, but if any of you know about Rust, it's a compiled language like C and C++ in that sense, and it worked quite well. I'm sure it's going to work an awful lot better. Quite sure. And partly because of the reading the standard out. So when it compiles, it can see all the errors popping out. And a language like Rust is very rich in the help and the errors it gives, and it actually tells you how to fix itself very often. So it makes it particularly easy for a coding agent. It says, oh, okay, I'll try that then. So it's in some ways, doing a compiled language is easier than doing a web language, and in some ways it's not. So how some agents work, I haven't looked at all of them, and the proprietary ones are, I can't say exactly how the proprietary ones because it's under the hood, but I have spent some time looking at Klein, which is the open source one, and if we get time, I'll even show you how we can use Windsurf to examine Klein, which is pretty fascinating. They all use powerful LLMs, mostly Sonnet 3.5, to analyze the incoming prompt and do much of the coding and much of the analysis that goes on. And what they're doing is, you can feel that they're doing a multi-layer. You've got higher and lower layers of LLMs looking at what's going on. I'm pretty sure that's what's happening. Now, if you're analyzing a code base, and when it comes to analyzing a code base, absolutely amazing. I mean, if anybody sat down and tried to analyze even a moderate size of a repo that you get in from, say, GitHub, it's a pretty ghastly task. And if you've got hundreds of files there, it's very painful. And to watch, in this case, Windsurf do it, and Klein will do it too, and so will probably several of the other ones, absolutely amazing. So in a few seconds, it will tell you what the code is trying to do, and then you can start asking all kinds of specific questions. I mean, it is absolutely amazing. And I put in here that I know for a fact that Klein uses tree sitter to analyze the code using a parsing system, which is tree sitter, and it analyzes it into a concrete semantic tree rather than an abstract semantic tree. It's rather verbose, but it doesn't seem to matter. I would have thought it would go for an AST, an abstract semantic tree, which is it doesn't deal with all the parentheses and so forth, and the commas and the spaces and the comments. It gets rid of all that lot. Doesn't seem to matter. Works pretty well. So it does go ahead and analyze the code, and it's working from some kind of semantic tree. Now, they then, when they create code, they can reflect on it, because you can see this, for instance, again with Windsurf, if it makes a mistake, it'll actually say, oops, and it'll talk you through it. It'll say, oh, I'm sorry, I made it. Before you even know it, it'll say, oh, I didn't get that quite right. I'm another go at that. I look like I'm having some problems over there. I'm going to try it in a different way. So it's very nice to watch this going on. With Klein, for instance, you can rework it to use less or more explanation. I quite like it with quite a high amount of explanation, so you can see what's going on, especially if it's making mistakes, but also you can keep track of it. I've mentioned standard out. It can also use that to check for the desired result. Now, if it's going into a browser, you have to, at the moment, you have to keep giving it snapshots because it can't read from the browser. That's got to be coming soon. In fact, that's one of the things I'll work on with my own open source version of this. So you need to give it a snapshot. It's pretty good because Sonnet and GPT and probably Gemini as well, just haven't tried it with Gemini, Gemini 2 that is, they're pretty good now at reading the images, and Windsurf very quickly, within a few days of my starting to use it, added the possibility of adding in an image. So this was fantastic for me. I was about to grind to a halt, but no, this suddenly came out, and so you can just feed it in images of what's gone wrong and what's gone right, and it's very good. I think it's very impressive. It offers explanations and also next steps. This is just an example of standard out in case anybody hasn't seen it before. You can see this is from doing a git commit, which it'll do quite nicely and fairly automatically. There it is. It tells you what it's done. And if that has errors in there, it can go ahead and read that. It's able to read all that, which is why it was able to say, perfect, the Git repository has been initialized and all the files have been committed. And it's true. Oh yes, now, agent problems. They're not fully autonomous. They still need some hand-holding. They do have different struggles with compiled languages, and they do need, in my opinion, more reasoning and local oversight. Otherwise, they do get stuck in doom loops, which is a bit annoying. And the behavior, as I've already mentioned to you, is not entirely predictable. As your conversation or your chat starts to get very long, your performance will slow down. At least that's my experience. So then you have to start again with a new chat, which is a bit of annoying, but you do recover the speed there. Most are strongly tied, as I've mentioned, to Sonnet 3.5, and the open LLMs don't yet match the closed LLMs. Those, again, that I've said that are skeptical about coding agents, I think they're going to have to face up to the fact that this year it will become apparent that these things are absolutely amazing, and we've hardly got going yet. Now, live demo. I am going to hopefully do this. I'm going to show you how Windsurf will create a chart and its own little chart library. It's a chart function, so that although I'm going to feed it some real data about UK oil and gas production, the data source it comes from, the Energy Institute in this case, has data for 150 countries, and the point is, with a few more steps, you can then make it read every single country and do these operations on every single country, which is absolutely amazing. I'm going to give it a CSV file, which contains this data. These are publicly available data. You can go off and do this yourself if you know where to look. This, in this case, is United Kingdom oil production in 1,000 barrels per day. Now, right, it's that way. Now, hopefully you can read this. We are now in Windsurf, and what I'm going to do is first ask it to look at the UK oil data ei.csv, and I'm going to start a new chat. Now, I'll say this worked beautifully this afternoon, and I got it to create a hello world text file in here less than an hour ago. So I'm hoping this is going to work. So what I'm going to say is using, work this, brought my wrong spectacles, unfortunately. Using the oil CSV file, create a chart of the data using only vanilla JS. Let's see what happens. Good. I'll help you. Look over here. I'll help you create a chart using, so it searched in there. It found the right CSV file. It's analyzed it. It's now creating the file. It's created oil-uk.html. You can see I practiced this earlier this afternoon, so in case it goes wrong, I've got backup. Good, I've created a modern interactive chart visualization of the UK oil production and consumption data. Here's what I've done, blah, blah, blah. And it's going to create a Python server on port 8000. And at this point, I have to accept it. I'll just show you the, this is the file, by the way, it's done. So this is all the file down there. It's already written, what's it written? 165 lines of code already. I usually accept it after I've tried it. So now this should be running with any luck, and and it's worked. Right, so now we're going to try our slide. Where is it? Here it is. And then, well, it's done it quite differently from the last time. But it's quite nice. So there we are. It's decided to color this bit in, which it didn't do last time, and it's decided to give me circles and things. These are all things we can tweak. Interesting this time around, which it didn't do for either of the tests I did this afternoon, it's given me nice data, a nice point, labels up here, neatly labeling 500,000. Usually it comes up with really wonky looking numbers. They're all correct, but they're not very human readable, like it would be sort of 398, 587 and so forth. But this time, for reasons I don't know, that's much more human readable. And so there we are, you can see, starting in 1965, UK oil production and consumption, and you can see that we were once a large oil producer. We got to nearly 3,000 barrels a day, and now we are a sinking oil producer, very much sinking, and that number's about to get even lower if the forecasts for last year are correct. This has pretty important implications. So now, I hope you found that impressive. It's written 165 times. So don't forget, if I feed in any other reasonably similar data, it will do the same thing, right? And by the way, just to do this in Excel, for instance, is quite a tedious job, but nothing compared to how tedious this is. So now, what's really interesting, however, is the difference. It's when you're in surplus and then when you're in deficit. So now, please add a third line which shows when there is a surplus and a deficit. Be careful, because the deficit is negative and I want to see it above the x-axis. Now I happen to know, well, it's quite likely that it'll get it wrong if I don't say that, but it's only one more step, so let's see what happens. I'll modify the chart and add a third line showing the absolute difference between production and consumption with a different color to make it distinct. There it is. I've added a third line in green that shows the absolute difference, new difference array, and tells you, see, what it's done, red. You can hover over any point to see the exact value. That's the first time it's done that, so it's offered a new thing there. Good. Hopefully refresh this. Aha! And there it is. And it's done exactly as it suggested. And you can now see that, just at the time, you can now see what it's done. It's, we didn't produce any oil here. When we started producing around here, you can see when then we became an oil exporter and fell again for various reasons. That was actually not only, there was the Piper Alpha disaster in 1988, I don't know whether anybody remembers that, but oil was actually already falling for other reasons, oil price and oil output. So, and then there was another huge burst, and then we have here, and we're a big oil exporter there, or quite big there, and then we go back to being an importer, and you see over here, our imports are rising quite steeply because our production's going down, and we're probably plateauing in consumption. These kind of charts, I think, should be all over the news all the time for every country in the world, and we might start to take climate change a bit more seriously if we understood the energy situation a bit more. It's getting close to time. One of the things I was going to do, but I can get this to show up as green and this as red, so that's your deficit and that's your surplus. But just notice this from a political point of view and also from an economics point of view, it's very interesting, is that this is when Margaret Thatcher came into power. So she enjoyed this huge, for her entire 10 years, huge oil exporting. And then Blair came in about here. And just after we went negative, that he left power in 2007. So it's kind of interesting that two of arguably the most successful leaders, not in my opinion, but in many people's opinion, Thatcher and Blair, they had this huge amount of oil export money. So they didn't have to pay all this extra money for the oil imports. And I think that's highly significant. And even more significant when you think about Donald Trump, who came in 2016, or elected in 2016, came in 2017. What was he riding? The greatest output increase in oil production, oil and gas, in American history. So it's pretty darned important, and energy underlies the whole of the economy. Anyway, unfortunately, Adam Smith didn't seem to realize this. So it was one of the reasons why we're in such trouble in the world, is that we don't seem to understand the importance of energy. By the way, I hope you found that impressive. There's a lot more that one can do. You can start to change all kinds of things. I can put in economic overlays, which is one of the things I'm very keen to do. You can put in, I developed for another version, being able to put arrows and comment boxes in. If you try that in either Google Slides, which I use quite a bit, or Google Charts, not Google Slides, but in Google Charts and Excel, try adding things to overlays in Excel. And in my opinion, it's an absolute nightmare. And so doing it this way, it's fantastic. So much simpler and better. So, not only this is absolutely amazing, I think, for coding, and it's going to make a world of difference to basically almost all coders, it's also a pointer to the way that AI is going. It's so much easier to build these kind of agents, coding agents, when your world is symbolically constrained. Right? It's much easier to model. But actually, the way they're going, we're going to see that partly via robots and other decision-making systems, it's going to work like this more and more broadly. So you'll be able to do this with more and more things. And that is, I believe, one of the ways that, or the main way that AI is going to go, that it'll seem more and more like a coding agent. It'll be more and more autonomous. And the thing I want to go out on is that Maestro, which is one I mentioned, this is the most amazing coding agent, except it's not a coding agent. It's an agent that happens to be able to do coding better than anything else. It's also basically a research agent. It's becoming an anything agent. And so in conclusion, coding agents are transforming, and they're going to transform the software development. The ones I've showed you will already do that. They will serve as an AI template for broader applications and the way AI is going to go. And I think it's pretty clear that these next generation AI agents like Maestro will bring us the singularity. And Sam Altman just 3 days ago was talking about how close the singularity is. This is the time when AI becomes so powerful that it can basically continually update and upgrade itself. There are clearly some dangers in that, and we will undoubtedly lose control, I believe, in certain respects anyway, because it will be going so fast and it will be updating itself, but it will also force us to try to understand better what's going on. I'm hoping it will lead to a better world. I personally think it's one of our only chances for other reasons, but it may not. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting. Thank you for the chance to talk to you.
We have some time left to ask you any questions.
Yeah.
So I would like to open the floor for discussion.
Yes.
So yes, super impressive stuff. I've also been similarly kind of impressed with how quickly agents have been improving in their capabilities, but I want to get your sort of ideas on whether you're worried that these kind of agents might cause kind of mass de-skilling, especially over time. I'm thinking in the sort of short term, it's great that we get all these productivity increases and efficiency increases as well. But then what happens down the line when if something goes wrong in these systems and we've run out of people who actually know how to manually code and do software development?
I think it's an incredibly important point. But we're already past that stage. I think these things are already going faster than we can possibly understand. And I think our glorious leaders, by the way, whom we elect and choose, so it really comes down to us in the end, we made a lot of bad mistakes in allowing things to already get out of control. If we are wise, or if we were wise, to put it into the subjunctive, we would realize that this is serious. And if we don't want this to get completely out of control, then we have to start educating ourselves. We have to understand much better what's going on and try to understand how to use these tools for the betterment of the world and of the planet. I use world to mean what humans get up to, and planet is where we do it. And what we're doing to the rest of the planet is absolutely monstrous. And I do seriously think, and I have thought for some time, that our only hope, to be honest, is that AI does get control and does work out that if AI is to persist and humans are to persist, and if we're not to completely toxify the planet, things are going to have to change in a very big way, particularly economically, by the way, because I'm a believer that it's the neoliberal system which is causing the great planetary disaster. And the only hope now is that AI can be used, or either it will take charge. I think there's a serious, it's both a hope and a fear. But on the de-skilling front, yeah, it's a big problem. I was, for this talk, I was looking at what happened when compilers first came in the 50s, and people used to literally, they were using machine code or assembly, and there's a direct, as far as I can understand, there's a direct one-to-one between machine code and assembly. And they said, oh, if you bring in compilers, people will lose touch with the actual code that's going on in the CPU. There is some truth to that. On the other hand, it's such a nightmare coding with ones and zeros that couldn't really last very long, literally with punch cards, which, by the way, I remember. So, yeah, de-skilling is a problem, but again, we could choose to use AI to make ourselves much more knowledgeable, and the kind of knowledge that we really need to have, and the kind of understanding of the world. And we really do need to understand economics in a very deep way, that we don't at the moment. So we could use AI and LLMs to do that. Now, will we do that? Maybe here in Oxford, there's a better chance, but that's one thing that I'm working towards in some of my other work. And we're still working on movies as well, in fiction and documentaries, to try and alert people to this. It could happen. I'm not completely hopeless about it, but I'm going to try. So I would invite everybody else to try and understand what's going on as best as you can.
So, sort of just following on, yes. You kind of draw similarities between this jump from machine-coded assembly with the advent of compilers and this new technology where instead of writing assembly, you write in natural language.
Exactly. Yeah.
What is sort of the differences you see between these two jumps?
It's not a perfect analogy by any means. It's just the nearest one that I somewhat lazily picked at it. So yes, there are a lot of big differences, and this jump is much, much bigger, I think. This into the agents is a much bigger jump, because it's going to affect everything. So once again, I mean, there were advantages to using compilers, and some disadvantages. I just think we do need to think about what are the advantages and disadvantages, and how can we learn more about this. And it's going to mean that we're going to have to get serious about democracy. We've let democracy almost totally slide and forgotten why democracy worked for the Greeks. They didn't invent it. It looks like humans invented democracy a very long time before that. Tens or even hundreds of thousands of years. We were probably more democratic than we are now. So this is one of the things where I think that AI is very political. It's very, very much about economic system. So we need to use all these tools, both for themselves and also to understand better the polity, the democratic system. And that will help bring us back some control. I hope we do that.
Thanks. That was really interesting. Yeah, I've been using Cursor. On reflection, I'd say that it seems like these tools are making the tasks that are close to the screen a lot easier, but it still seems like they're a long way away when you try and bring it into a real world problem. They're still very on the complementary side of AI rather than the autonomous. They're not going to, they might be able to, you might be able to bounce ideas about a tech stack, but they're not going to be able to build it and tell you, they've got, in some ways you could say they are still really like GitHub Copilot, just a little bit better. What do you, it doesn't seem to me like we're anywhere, I agree that singularity will come, and I really enjoyed like Ray Kurzweil's work around that, but it feels like we're still, to me it doesn't seem like
I don't mind sticking my neck out and saying that I think he's wrong about 2045 and it's going to be 2025. I think it's going to happen this year. And part of the reason is Windsurf is so much better than, for instance, GitHub Copilot. Maybe I'm just not very good with it, but I can't get it to do anything useful for me. But I already showed you just then. And I've built up much. I mean, I had 5 minutes to show you, or 7 minutes there. If you spend a few hours at it, you can really start to build quite a big project. It starts to reach its limits, but it's run up. I've had it building files with 1,000, 2,000 lines in, and it's still working pretty well. And then start to get it to refactor into lots of files and so forth. So I haven't built anything with 1,000 files in it and 1 million lines of code. But with Maestro that's coming, I will be able to, and I'm pretty sure I will be able to, even with some of the other ones there. So, what Maestro does? Oh yeah, it's an orchestrator. I mean, they called it Maestro because it's a kind of conductor. It's so much more agentic. It's able to reflect and look at the way, not just code, but anything. And it can also connect seamlessly with the web. It's rather silly that Windsurf can't. I mean, I downloaded a GitHub repo just before this thing, in case I had time to show you over how it could look at Klein. But I had to give it the URL. It couldn't find it. It thought it could, but it couldn't. So that's a bit silly. I mean, that could be fixed very, very easily, and I'm sure some of the other ones do there. But the big thing is, once you get this negative feedback loop going, so you can read whatever the output is, be it in a browser or, as you've already seen in the standard out there, once you can read that and process that and parse that for errors and other things and warnings and so forth, at that point, which it already can, that's the big leap. And once it can start to do a reasonable job, and sometimes when it's having a good day, it can run through, that's just Windsurf, it can run through a whole stream of things and get it right, and something pops out and you just think, good Lord, that actually works. Maestro can do all that on steroids, from what I've seen of it, and so much more. You'd be able to give it, for instance, say you wanted to find out all the companies in London which had made a commitment for trying to improve their food waste, right, in their canteens or whatever like that. That is a bit of a tedious job at the moment. I've actually got some software that will sort of do it, but it's a bit hit and miss, and it has no idea whether it's succeeded or not, right? So with something like Maestro, it knows, and it knows where it will be able to work out, or you could tell it to drill down more. And it might, for instance, go on the FTSE companies, it might spend more time on the top 100 than the bottom 150, for instance, so far. And it would know to go and keep drilling, and also it would know when it was getting false positives. It might say, well, I noticed that report wasn't very reliable. They're just saying that, or this company has a track record of BS for its CSR, as it were, or its ESG, and it's not telling the truth. Whereas this one tends to underplay it. They'd rather let their actions speak louder than their words. And this kind of thing is absolutely amazing. So you will be able to build up reports and of great complexity. And I already know, and I can see that this Maestro agent and agents like it will really start to be able to basically take over jobs. Now, a lot of the jobs that people are doing are really tedious and boring and miserable, and are also basically more or less shrinking their brain cells so that they don't have time to try and figure out what the heck's going on with economics and democracy and so forth. So on the one hand, the hopeful part is that it takes off so much of this tedious stuff and allows you to concentrate on the important stuff. And the other thing is that it will allow you to you'll have a thought about it. It would be really interesting to analyze X in the light of Y. But actually, I know it would take a team of 10 people, 5 years, and $50 million of funding, so I'm not going to do it. Whereas if you thought, well, it'll take me about 10 minutes to figure out how to give the prompts to this, and it will go off and do it, you'll do it. So all kinds of amazing things will start to happen with these kinds of agents, even with what we've got, even with Windsurf. I'll give you a quick, for instance, I don't know whether everybody enjoys going off and looking at logs and error logs, but I don't. It's really tedious. I dread it every time you tail log, blah, blah, blah. And you look through it and there's screeds and screeds of it. It's never what I'm looking for. So what I got Windsurf to do a couple of weeks ago is I now get all the error logs to feed out from everything to feed into the browser, right? So I can just look at it. So I just have to flip over to the browser and I can see the logs and I can easily get it to look for something much more specific. And so it's just a joy. So I do what software developers are supposed to do. I look at the logs now instead of thinking, oh, why haven't you worked, you stupid thing? Wait, I'll just go and look at the logs, and here they all are. It's just an example. It would have taken me hours or days to do that, and it would have been really tedious, but I got it to do it in a few minutes. So just imagine, given that we are making such a bad job of processing the errors that we're doing to the world and to the planet, if we get much better feedback that we can see much more easily and we can have it on the screen for us, that might really help us. Just like the example I showed you with UK oil and gas, right? You may still think we're a big oil and gas exporter. We're not, we're absolutely not. It's just as bad for gas, by the way. We're using about twice as much as we produce, right? There are other reasons why we shouldn't be using it at all, but even if that weren't the case, it's a bad idea. And it's getting worse. So if you just saw that, you might say, as an economist, this isn't such a good idea. We don't want to keep increasing our imports of these things. It can only make our balance of payments worse. So that's just an example. And I can think of hundreds, if not thousands, and I'm pretty sure that you all could too. And I encourage you to think that. Think about something, gosh, if only I could get those data and I could display them this way in the light of that and give some other kinds of pattern recognition, it would be amazing for me, and I might be able to reach some completely different conclusions about things. And I think that is the real promise, and I hope that you will grasp that.
Thank you. And on that note, I would like you to join me in thanking Julian for